Yes. Okay, so winning technique used for BSD, limit of language, Ludwig Wittgenstein. This is the first opera. This is Laurent today showing that he wants to say pro. Now we move to the winning technique, and Laurent, as I said, made this study 30 years ago, I don't remember. And these are the results. The number of failures were significantly reduced with pressure support, and also the number of patients that could not be weaned was significantly reduced. And this is the paper by Andrés Esteban. And this is the meta-analysis I mentioned you before. You see simple weaning, difficult weaning, prolonged weaning, no difference despite a slight improvement by pressure support as opposed to the T-tube trial. And the same when it comes, this was for weaning success, and this is for the risk of reintubation. Again, no difference at all. So, as I said, explain me why and how I can convince my nurses to disconnect the patient from the ventilator, make a new circuit, try to test it. Now, Laurent focused his presentation on the use of the TPs for spontaneous breathing trial, and as I imagine, he made this correct point. When you extubate the patient, the resistive work is not decreased at all, likely because of edema of the upper airways. And what he says that the TP's trial reflect the work of breathing in the patient after extubation. However, Andrés Esteban made this study that Laurent also showed, showing basically no difference in the risk of reintubation between the T-tube trial and pressure support. And again, if there is no difference, explain me why I should ask my nurses to disconnect the patient and blah, 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 blah. And these are the conclusion that spontaneous breathing trial with pressure support or T-tube are suitable methods for successful discontinuation. So Andrés Esteban, the strongest supporter of the T-tube, said, listen, no major problem in patients with simple weaning, which are, as Laurent showed us, the vast majority of our patients. So now I'm going to list the reasons why I don't choose a T-tube trial, because there is no superiority from a clinical and outcome perspective. First, as I said, you have to mount a new circuit. Second, you cannot monitor during the T-tube trial. If I leave my patient connected to the ventilator, I can observe immediately changes in respiratory rate or tidal volume, which may be after a few minutes, and as in this slide stolen by Martin Tobin, or may occur even later. And I don't have a right spirometer anymore because I wasn't able to find a company fixing the one I had that got broken. Second, as Laurent showed you before, when you disconnect the patient with a T-tube, with the T-piece, you suddenly increase the negative oscillation in intrathoracic pressure. And there are conditions where this is what we want. We want to stress the system to be sure. But there are patients like the patient with well-known or sometimes occult cardiopathy who may be extremely in discomfort and can be extremely in danger for a few minutes of a situation like the one described many, many years ago by François Lemaire and co-authors. And there is another situation where I would never use the T-tube because potentially dangerous. It is true in the majority of patients you remove the tube and the resistive work does not increase. But if for some reason you had to select a small tube, 6.5, Well, in that case, I would strongly recommend not to use the T-tube because this is going to be a resistive trial of breathing. And we know that a resistive breathing trial may significantly damage the respiratory muscle. And it's not a matter of just recovering from fatigue after a trial like this. It may generate significant problem. And finally, in patients like the one, the tracing by Cabell and co-worker that I showed you before, I believe that we should start to reconsider the conventional scheme of start, treatment, weaning, extubation. Because in a patient like that, whatever the trial you use, you would probably select to use NIV after extubation. If the patient has that oscillation, it's probably better to protect extubation and to do it not when the situation is already patent, obvious, but before anticipating it. We don't exactly know what are the patients at risk, but I can tell you that patients with chronic respiratory failure and chronic heart failure are for sure candidates for this type of strategy. You remember, this is my last slide. I tried to get time and apologize because I really run. But Andrés Esteban, who was the stronger supporter of the T-tube trial, very recently wrote this article. And he makes 3 points that I entirely support. To save the cost of the T-tube, the flow-by settings of the ventilator could be used. So I don't use the T-tube trial when I want to stress the system. I just set the ventilator, 0 PEEP, 0 support, flow-by, and as Laurent said, today ventilators are not the ventilators we used 20 years ago. This practice simplifies the work of nurses and physicians. I would totally agree with this statement. And third, in the case of failed patient, could help to relieve the stress posed on the respiratory muscles secondary to the increased work of breathing. Remember, if you can monitor what you are doing during the spontaneous free breathing trial, the risk of damaging the patient is significantly reduced. So, T-tube trial, thanks, but this belongs to the past. And I wish to thank you for your attention.